Have you ever run into the situation with a professor that just doesn't understand why you need an accommodation, what those accommodations are all about, and why they have to follow the accommodations? I know a lot of people with disabilities who've gone to college and have voiced that same complaint. Today I'm going to talk to you about faculty and how to talk to faculty and what to expect from faculty at the college level, and find out exactly how to simplify your life when you're talking to a professor about your disability needs. Welcome to College, Disabilities, and Success, Episode 17, Talking to Faculty by Mickey Hayes. The opinions in this podcast are my own, so if you have any questions or concerns, please reach out to your college disability services, any physicians or doctors, or legal services for any additional information that you may need regarding your specific circumstances. One of the first things that you should understand when you go to college is that the professor should not have access to your disability records and information. That information is housed by the Disability Services Department, and whether it's stored physically or electronically, it will still have barriers that the average person who goes into the college records should not be able to access with regards to your disability. It's not like high school, where kind of everybody knew a whole lot of what was going on in terms of your disability. In college, the professor really doesn't know unless you specifically go tell that person. Now, some people include it on their application, so the information could filter down to your professors via the application. But the reality is most professors have no clue that you even have a disability unless it's an obvious physical disability that anybody can see. And even then, if you have multiple disabilities, they're not going to know what those are. So other than something physically that they might see, the average college professor really has no clue that you are walking into that classroom with any kind of special needs unless you tell the professor. Now, colleges have systems in place for you to talk to the professor. You go to Disability Services office, you register with the Disability Services, you provide them your documentation and your paperwork. They evaluate it and they determine how they can accommodate you based on that particular college's parameters and guidelines and rules. And then they will prepare an accommodation memo, letter, some sort of a form for you to take to your faculty. Now, the form, the accommodation memo, the paper, whatever it happens to be, should not list your disability on it. It should merely state that you are a student with a disability that has self-identified and you are entitled to the following accommodations. And that would be the paper that you would take directly to the professor. So here's where things get a little bit interesting, because you really need to know how to talk to the professor when you take them that accommodation form. One of the warnings I used to always give to my students, my new students especially, was don't just hand them this accommodation letter and go away. And don't hand it to them at the beginning of class when they are getting ready to start up and teach their class. Ideally, when you get an accommodation form, you take that form and privately talk to the professor either before classes begin for the semester or during their office hours as soon as you are able to talk to them. When you sit down with that professor and discuss your accommodations, you want to think ahead of time, how much do you want to reveal about your disability? You do not have to reveal anything if you don't want to. How much you choose to reveal is strictly your decision. Now, some people recommend just put it all out there, don't worry about it. Other people are absolutely adamant that nothing be revealed about their disability to the professor. And then a lot of students just sort of fall somewhere in between that. I'm not going to recommend that you do or don't tell the professor about your disability because I think that is a personal decision. You do have to bear in mind that not every professor is versed in all kinds of disabilities. And a lot of times populations in general, not just faculty, but populations in general have preconceived notions about disability that could come back to be a problem for you if you don't really clear up any preconceived notions that your professor may have. So when you decide how much you're going to reveal about your disability, that is strictly your decision because you know what's best in your life and what works the best for you. Regardless, when you give them that paper and you start talking about your accommodations, you really need to make sure that you and the professor are on the exact same page procedurally. In other words, if you're going to have extended time for your tests, which is a very common accommodation, and you're getting extended time for your tests, well, how exactly does that professor want to handle your tests? Do you take it in a test center? Do they want you to take it in a separate room? Do they want you to take it at a separate time? Will you be required to take it at a separate time simply because of the way your schedule falls? If you have a class immediately after the first class, then you can't double up your time on that test in the first class if it's going to impact your attendance in the second class. So you really have to think through your schedule and your time frame and see how it's going to work best for you. Some professors say, well, just get to it sometime during the day. Others say, I want you to have it finished by noon. Others say, get to it when you can, and some are very specific, you'll be here at 9 o'clock. So you have to figure that out, and you have to have those conversations with the professor. Are you going to take it in the test center? Are you going to take it in an empty classroom? Do you have to take it at the professor's office? Some people like the idea of taking the test in the professor's office. Others are totally freaked out by it. They want no part of being in the professor's office for a test. So you have to figure out what works best for you and then voice your concern or agreeability to the information the professor suggests. If you run into a situation, regardless of the accommodation, where neither you or the professor seem to be on the same page with the best way to handle the accommodation, or perhaps the professor questions your real need for the accommodation, there's a couple of things I suggest. And number one is, first of all, don't start arguing, because if you find yourself in an argumentative position with the professor, that's never going to come out good for you. So if something is happening that you're not happy with, step away from the situation and then talk to the disability services specialist who helped you get those accommodations and find out their recommendations. Sometimes the disability services staff person can set up an appointment for you, for the professor, and for disability services to all be present and to discuss your specific accommodation requirements. And the disability services specialist will be the one who explains to the professor how critical your need is for that accommodation without revealing your disability per se. So those are conversations that the disability specialist can set up for you if that is one of the situations that you feel is warranted. They always want you to talk to the professor first if you can. So it's best for you to talk to the professor first about your accommodations needs, and then if you see that that's not going the way you would like it to go, then talk to the disability services people. Now, sometimes there are some faculty members who really get accommodations. They understand the need and they have no problems with accommodations at all. And they really do understand the role of accommodations and the need for those accommodations for a student with a disability. Some professors don't really understand it, and they don't understand how the whole system works. Oftentimes you'll see this in adjunct faculty who are maybe in for a semester and then out for a semester, or they may be new to being a professor at the college, so they really don't have a lot of history and training and experience with that. So there are different varieties, different levels of faculty and their knowledge about disabilities. You may find yourself on the explaining end of things to some professors, and that's okay. If you're comfortable with that, you may ask disability services if they'll go in and talk to a professor and explain to them without your presence, if you're comfortable with that. Every situation is one of those that's unique to you, and it's a question of how to set it up between you, the professor, and disability services. Hidden disabilities are another issue. Professors will look at you and wonder, well, why would you even need this accommodation? That makes no sense to them. And some professors don't realize that you just don't say that out loud, and you certainly don't announce it to the class. So there are certain behaviors that are expected at the college level, and so that goes back to having those private conversations with them as opposed to mentioning something in class someday or at the end of class someday. And especially if you're dealing with hidden disabilities, learning disabilities, mental health disabilities, depression, substance abuse problems, PTSD, there's a whole wealth of hidden disabilities out there that require a little bit of a finesse sometimes with the professors. So again, talk to disability services if you feel uncomfortable about those issues with regards to conversation and your disabilities services people. I've had many students who had physical disabilities that were obvious, but they also had hidden disabilities that were not obvious. And so many times the professors assumed that the physical disability was the real issue, and in reality the physical disability wasn't the issue at all, that there was a hidden disability behind the scenes that was really the problem that that student was dealing with. And so you may be in a situation where you kind of have to explain that there's more than just the physical problem going on. So again, think about how much you want to reveal and how much you don't want to reveal, and then act accordingly. But that decision is yours. It should be yours. I did personally find that the longer I worked in disability services, the less problematic things were for the students because the faculty was very accustomed and accepting of accommodations. So take that for what it's worth, but I think it does help when the professors have had a little bit of an experience working and supporting students with disabilities, either through their own personal lives or at the college. And that really is most everybody these days. So in summary, number 1, the faculty member should not have access to your disability records. Number 2, you need to discuss those and arrange your accommodations with the Disability Services Office. Number 3, the Disability Services Office is going to prepare some sort of an accommodation form or memo for you to take to the professor, whether it's sent electronically or in person. There is a way they will have it get from you to the professor. And number 4, if you run into problems with the professor, do your best to address them on your own at first. And then if you see that's really not working out well, go have a conversation. Don't get angry, but go have a conversation with Disability Services about how they suggest you address the situation. And usually, in most cases, a meeting with the Disability Services and you and the professor generally should take care of things. You may have to go to a higher level of administration. That happens sometimes, and that's okay too. It's just all depends on your particular situation. But as an adult, those are just the responsibilities that you are expected to handle, which, by the way, I said you are expected to handle, not your parents. That's another story for another day. I hope you found this podcast worthwhile today. I think talking to faculty is critical, and understanding faculty and where they're at and where they're coming from is critical as well. I was not only a high school teacher for kids with disabilities, learning disabilities, but I was also a college adjunct professor for 11 years, and I worked in the Disability Services Office. So I kind of am uniquely positioned to address the issues that you face in a college situation. If you have any specific questions for me that you would like me to answer or discuss with you, send me an email. I'm at Mickie, M-I-C-K-I-E, teaches@gmail.com, or go to my website, mickieteaches.com, and on that site you can request contact information with me. So there's a form there you can fill out as well. But my goal is to help students with disabilities achieve as much as they can in a college environment. Take care and have a great rest of the day, and I look forward to talking to you again in the next episode. Bye. Information contained throughout this podcast has been gleaned from my own personal experiences, but to ensure accuracy, please contact the Disability Services at the college of your choice to have first-hand information and the most up-to-date policies and procedures followed by your particular institution of higher education. The content in any of these podcasts is not intended as a substitute for information from legal, educational, or medical professionals. Always seek the advice of your attorney or qualified healthcare provider with any questions you may have with regards to legal, educational, or medical concerns.